Hello, my name's Felicity. I earned my wings, then my sister shredded them, the night before my very first flight, and she didn't do it quietly. She did it knowing the captain would walk in. She did it knowing no one would stop her. She even smiled when I froze, holding the pieces of my dream in my hands like trash. They said it was a misunderstanding, that maybe I overreacted, that maybe I wasn't emotionally stable enough to fly. But what if the lie wasn't that I was unstable? What if the truth was that they'd always planned to keep me grounded? What kind of family does that? What kind of sister smiles while clipping your wings? The overhead lights in the locker room were brutal, fluorescent, sterile, exposing every crease on my face and every wrinkle in my nerves. My hands were still cold from the autumn air outside, and I could hear my own footsteps echo as I stepped inside, trying to steady my breath. This was it. My first real day as a commercial airline pilot. I had rehearsed everything the night before. The walk, the smile, even the casual way I'd nod to the crew like I'd done it all before. My badge, freshly printed, still smelled like warm plastic. I clutched it in one hand, and in the other, a sealed plastic garment bag. Inside, the navy blue uniform I'd dreamed of wearing since I was a kid, sitting in the back of Dad's car, watching planes disappear into the clouds. I reached my assigned locker, fourth row, far end. Quiet, tucked away. I wanted it that way. Less attention, less noise. But the second I opened the locker door, everything fell apart. Literally. The uniform inside, my uniform, had been shredded. Not torn accidentally. No. This was intentional. Deliberate. Strips of fabric. Buttons snapped off. Threads dangling like nerve endings. The skirt was in pieces. The blazer slashed through the emblem. The wings were gone. All of it. I froze. My stomach dropped to the soles of my shoes. Then I heard it. The sound of her chewing gum, that slow, rhythmic pop she'd done since high school when she was about to say something nasty. "You're up early," came a voice from the bench behind me. Calm. Calculated. I turned slowly. And there she was. Isolde. My sister. Her dark hair was tied back in that too-tight bun that made her look like she never blinked. She was leaning against the wall like she'd been waiting for this moment. For me. Her phone in hand, legs crossed, like it was just another Tuesday. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She gestured toward the uniform scraps. "Oops," she said, mock casual. "Must have gotten lost in the wash." "Isolde," I whispered, because yelling felt useless. "Why would you—" "You're not flying today, Felicity," she interrupted, her tone flat. "You're not flying above me. Not today. Not ever, if I can help it." My fingers clutched the edge of the locker door. I could barely breathe, and I hated myself for letting her see how shaken I was. She stood, stepped closer. I didn't flinch, but my heart was hammering. She looked me up and down, her lips curling. "You think this place is ready for you? For your emotional breakdowns and little panic attacks? I've been holding this place together for 6 years, and now you waltz in with your straight-A certificates and your fresh-pressed dreams?" She stepped past me, slowly, brushing her shoulder against mine. "There's only one Sorrel this place respects, and I already made sure you wouldn't be the second." My mind was a blank page, white noise, rage, fear, humiliation. I bent down to gather the remains of the uniform, though I didn't know why. Maybe I thought if I pieced it together, I could still make it work. That's when the door opened again. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Captain Ellery. I'd met him once during orientation. He'd been short, almost brusque, but his reputation was ironclad. Former Navy, no nonsense, and my direct captain for today's flight. He stepped in, halted, saw the fabric in my hands, saw my sister standing smugly, and saw the absolute panic plastered all over my face. He said nothing, not one word. His gaze landed on Isolde, then flicked to me. His jaw moved like he was grinding something down. Then, without even blinking, he muttered, "Briefing in 30 minutes," and turned on his heel. The door clicked behind him, and with it, any sense of support I'd hoped for. I dropped onto the bench, numb. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, I just sat there, clutching the shredded blazer like it was a life vest. This was my first day, my dream job, and the only person who could have had my back had just walked away. My badge had fallen at my feet. I reached for it, my hand trembling. As I picked it up, the screen lit up. A notification blinked. Flight crew reassignment. You've been moved to ground support. Please report to HR. My mouth went dry. That was it. No explanation, no warning. Just gone. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to tell me this was a mistake, a technical glitch, anything. But nothing changed, and neither did the sinking feeling in my chest. Was that my only chance? I whispered, not to anyone, just to the air, the flickering lights, the walls that had already heard too much. I stood up slowly, legs weak beneath me. The pieces of my uniform were still on the floor. I didn't pick them up. I just left. The badge was still in my hand when the notification lit up. Not a call, not even a message from a human being, just a sterile, automated prompt blinking back at me like a closed door. Your role has been reassigned. I didn't move at first. My mind tried to rationalize it. Technical glitch? Maybe HR moved things around. But even before I opened the crew app on my tablet, my gut had already started bracing for the blow. Effective immediately. Reassignment to ground operations support. That was the exact line. No greeting. No explanation. Just a plain, faceless sentence that carried more weight than anything my sister could have screamed. I stood there in the locker room for a while. The pieces of my shredded uniform were still on the floor behind me. The air felt thicker than it had 5 minutes ago. I couldn't even tell if it was humiliation, anger, or disbelief pulsing through me, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not with her smirking in the background, not with every second reminding me that I was no longer flying. I stepped out of the locker room and headed down the corridor toward the operations desk. My shoes felt too loud against the linoleum. The hallway wasn't busy yet, but a few staff passed by. Each glance either avoided mine or skimmed over me like I didn't exist. That's the thing about airports. Everyone's rushing to somewhere, but you feel it when you've just been left behind. The man behind the ops desk, Steve, a middle manager I'd only spoken to once during orientation, was scrolling through his screen. When I approached, he glanced up, already uncomfortable. I got a reassignment notice, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Steve shifted, then looked back at the monitor. Right, yeah, you've been marked as emotionally unfit to fly. HR will follow up with you today. Emotionally unfit? I repeated, not even bothering to hide the disbelief. Based on what? He didn't look at me. He didn't even pretend to check the file. You'd have to take that up with HR. I'm just showing you what I was told. You know this is going on my permanent file, right? My voice was quieter now, but sharper. That's the kind of flag that ends careers. He finally met my eyes. I'm not the one who made that call. I stepped back, throat burning. Of course he wasn't. People like Steve never make the call. They just pass it along, like bad weather reports. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Instead of heading to HR, I found a corner in the hallway where no one was around, just a folding chair next to a storage closet where I sat down and tried to catch my breath. The hall buzzed faintly with distant intercom calls and the hum of vending machines, but inside me, it was deafening silence. Emotionally unfit. That phrase rang in my ears like a cheap insult dressed up in clinical language. I hadn't panicked. I hadn't faltered. I'd walked into the locker room like any other pilot, only to find my career torn up by someone who shared my last name. And that phrase, it wasn't random. She gets anxious when things don't go perfect. I remembered those exact words coming out of Isolda's mouth years ago during a family dinner when I'd excused myself after a panic attack in college. She'd said it like a joke, like she was doing damage control before I could explain anything for myself. My parents had chuckled politely, then changed the subject. That was always her style, cutting you down under the pretense of care. Now, it was in a file. I opened the HR portal on my tablet, and something told me to check the synced drives. Years ago, Isolda had connected her old iPad to our shared cloud to help manage travel plans for our mom. She probably forgot. I hadn't. And there it was, a draft email from Isolde to HR, never sent, just sitting in her drive. I'm concerned for my sister's readiness. She's had breakdowns before. I wouldn't want her mental state to jeopardize passenger safety. My fingers went numb. I read it again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. There was no concern in those lines. It wasn't protective. It was calculated. She hadn't sabotaged me in a fit of jealousy. She'd planned this. She'd written this before I ever stepped into the building. This wasn't about being the better sister or the smarter employee. This was about control, keeping me small, grounded. I stared at the wall across from me, white, cracked in one corner, a maintenance sticker curling off the light switch. Suddenly, it felt like I was back in our childhood bathroom, 10 years old, sitting on the floor after Isolde locked me out of our room. Back then, it had just been a prank. Now, it was career assassination wrapped in company policy. I didn't cry. I didn't feel like she deserved that satisfaction. What I felt was something deeper, a kind of silent collapse, not just in confidence, but in trust. I pulled out my phone and tapped the only contact who might actually listen, Lyora Vance, veteran flight attendant. She'd trained me back during my internship days. The kind of woman who didn't smile unless she meant it, and who never entertained drama, but always knew when something wasn't right. I typed the message, "Can you talk?" My thumb hovered over the send button for a second, then I tapped it. No punctuation, no explanation, just 3 words, because somehow I knew she'd already heard the rumors, and maybe, just maybe, she knew something more. The rain had softened to a mist, hanging in the air just enough to blur the outline of the planes on the runway. I stood outside the terminal, my coat barely shielding me from the damp chill settling in my collar. My thumb hovered over the phone screen. The message had been sent. "Can you talk?" And now I waited. No response yet. Each second felt heavy, suspended between what I knew and what I wasn't ready to admit out loud. Through the window beside me, I watched a departure board flip slowly. Flight numbers came and went, except mine. My name wasn't on any of those rosters anymore. I didn't belong to any gate, any team, any sky. I was erased. The ache settled in deeper as my eyes followed a plane taxiing to the runway. I'd dreamt of this moment for years, but it wasn't supposed to look like this. Not standing in the rain, not watching others live the version of life I'd worked for, while I stayed grounded, pun intended. Waiting didn't help, so I walked. Past the security doors, through the staff exit, toward the quieter backlot near the crew parking area. The city was still waking up. Everything was gray, sky, asphalt, even the morning radio chatter echoing from an open maintenance truck window. The world didn't stop just because my heart had come. A familiar smell passed by. Wet concrete and old pine needles. It reminded me of home. Of that one night 2 weeks ago, just before all this spiraled. I'd come home for dinner. A celebration, Mom had called it, even though I knew better. The flashback didn't need permission, it just came. The dining room had been set perfectly, like always. Isolde's favorite casserole. That strange wine Dad used to like, though it always tasted like metal to me. Mom lit candles, even though we weren't expecting company. Everything felt rehearsed, like a play I'd walked into too late to change the script. Isolde had shown up late, but swept in like she owned the room. Hugged Mom like she hadn't seen her in years, even though they lived in the same house. She didn't even glance at me before dropping her keys on the table and sliding into the head chair, Dad's old spot. Conversation flowed. About her department's new safety protocol, the young recruits she had to manage, the email she got from upper management, just praising her consistency. And me? I was barely a blip. My name came up once, when Mom mentioned I had finished simulator training. "Oh yeah," Isolde said between bites, not looking up. "I helped her prep for that. She panicked before the first flight sim, remember? But she's getting there." Getting there, like I was some charity case, like the hours I poured into every checklist, every code, every pre-flight analysis were hers to reference. I remember pushing food around on my plate, forcing a smile. No one asked how I was feeling. No one asked about my schedule. I might as well have been the cousin they invited out of pity. Even then, I knew. This wasn't new. It had always been like this. Isolde was the benchmark, the star, the trusted one. I was the resilient sister, the one who bounced back, not the one who led. Even when I earned something, it got reframed, twisted into a narrative where Isolde had played some guiding role. Her success was individual, mine, always somehow collective, always thanks to. The rain picked up again, snapping me out of it. I reached for my phone to check the time, and that's when I saw the email alert. Document accessed, scholarship archive folder. My pulse quickened. Years ago, I'd set up a trigger on my email to notify me if anyone opened that folder. A folder that contained all my early applications, scholarships, internships, letters of recommendation. It was buried deep in my cloud drive, long forgotten. I clicked through, and there it was, a file labeled Flight Ed Scholar 2009 PDF. I opened it. It was a grant acceptance letter from a National Aviation Association. Addressed to me, Felicity Sorrell. Full tuition coverage for advanced flight school, pending verification of identity and acceptance. The timestamp was from over a decade ago, but the download history showed it had been accessed and rerouted. The original email had been forwarded to Isolde's inbox. On the same day, I received a generic rejection notice. I closed my eyes, jaw locked. She didn't just take the spotlight, she stole the engine. She had accepted that scholarship in my name. Used it to transfer her own certification to commercial, then told everyone she'd done it on her own, and I'd believed I just hadn't been good enough. I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. The pieces were lining up now. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, this was systemic erasure. I sat down on the curb, near the crew lot, my jacket soaking through. My legs ached, but I didn't care. I needed to feel the cold, needed to anchor myself. I've been climbing out of holes she's dug since I was 17, I muttered. I thought about the extra classes I worked overtime to afford, the part-time jobs I picked up while studying, the way I'd bite my tongue every time someone praised my resilience without realizing it came from crawling through sabotage. This wasn't just a professional betrayal, it was historical, structural, etched into every family photo where she stood in the center and I stood off to the side. But now, I wasn't backing away. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the version of me she feared would outgrow her. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Meet me in the hangar lot. I have something you need to hear. Lyora. I made my way to the hangar lot slowly, hands deep in my coat pockets, every step measured. The lot sat behind the maintenance bay, just far enough from the main terminal to feel like its own world. Quiet, industrial, overlooked. The air was cooler now, the kind of chill that settled into your sleeves and made you aware of how tired your body really was. Lyora was already there. She leaned against her car, arms crossed, her stance firm but familiar. The light from the single overhead fixture bathed her in a tired orange glow. It flickered once, just once, then stayed steady, as if it too understood that tonight wasn't the time for theatrics. I approached, and she didn't say hello. She just looked at me. The way someone does when they've already decided to be on your side, whether or not you're ready to fight. You look like hell, she said simply. I huffed out something between a laugh and an exhale. You should see the other guy. Lyora raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching. She reached into the inside pocket of her windbreaker and pulled out a folded slip of paper. No names, just a printout. I took it. The words weren't long. A short message, sent from an internal alias. Keep her grounded. You know what she's capable of. I read it 3 times, then I looked back up. This went out the night before your reassignment, she said, to several senior staff, not just HR, ops, scheduling, even one of the pilots on your flight roster. I didn't speak. My fingers tightened around the page. It doesn't say your name, she continued, but anyone who's worked here more than 5 minutes knows who it's about. I handed the paper back, though I wanted to crumple it. Is this why no one looked me in the eye yesterday? I asked. It's why they pulled you off that flight without even letting you plead your case. Her voice had that edge now, the one she usually saved for gate agents who thought she was just a flight attendant. This is gaslighting, I said quietly. Professional, coordinated, It's not just sabotage, it's a smear campaign. Leora opened her car door without a word, reached into the glove box, and pulled out a USB stick. She didn't hand it to me right away. She looked at it, then looked at me. I wasn't going to get involved, she said. You know how it works here. You step into the fire, you're gonna get scorched. But then I heard this. She placed it in my hand. I hesitated. What is it? She answered simply. Proof. Back at my place, I plugged it into my laptop. The recording was low quality, faint humming from the break room refrigerator in the background, someone clicking a pen. And then, her voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable. If she gets on that flight, I'm done here. I'll go public with everything. She panics. She overthinks. She's not safe. I won't let her fly. Isolde, my sister. She was talking to someone she clearly trusted. And she wasn't whispering. She was making a case. A calculated one. I covered for her during simulator phase. I told HR she was just nervous. But if she flies solo and something goes wrong, it's on me. And I'm not putting my job on the line for that. There was a pause. A sip of something. Coffee, maybe. You think she's ready? Look, this industry doesn't reward good hearts. It rewards stability, and Felicity has never been stable. I clicked pause. My hands were stone. That was all I needed to hear. And yet I sat there, staring at the screen, breath shallow, chest aching, like I'd run 10 flights of stairs. It wasn't just unkind. It was dangerous. If she'd said it to HR directly, it would have been hearsay, but said in the break room, with enough detail to poison the well, she wanted me out. Not because I was a risk, but because I was competition. She'd created a narrative where I couldn't be trusted with passengers, so she could keep her reputation spotless. And the thing was, she almost succeeded. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The anger was too sharp, too clean. It carved out space inside me for something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about ethics, about safety, about the truth. The next morning, I met with HR. I didn't tell them about the recording, not yet. Instead, I asked questions, pointed ones. I watched how they deflected, how their language shifted from concerns to recommendations to temporary reassignments. I saw the dance. I saw the silence behind every shrug. That night, I called Leora. I'm not going public, I said. A pause. Okay, she said slowly. Then what? I'm going internal, I told her. Internal ethics, flight board, union rep, quietly, professionally. I'll take this to every channel that requires a signature and a receipt. Leora exhaled through the line, a low breath of approval. That's the kind of quiet that makes noise. I'm not out to destroy her, I added, but I'm not letting her destroy me either. There was another pause. Then her voice softened. You sound like a damn pilot. I didn't respond, but my fingers touched the edge of the USB again, still plugged into my laptop. The next day, I submitted the recording, the anonymous message, and a full written statement to the Internal Review Committee, names, dates, documentation. Nothing emotional, just the facts. It felt clinical, cold, but also right. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. My phone buzzed. One unread message. Meeting request. Internal Review Committee, 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. I barely slept. The hours between that meeting request and the morning alarm were a blur of half-brewed coffee and sentences I rehearsed over and over in my head. But nothing sounded right at 3:00 a.m. Everything felt either too angry or too fragile. I didn't want to show up emotional. I wanted to show up prepared. By the time the sun cracked through the blinds, I'd already showered, dressed, and slipped into a uniform that wasn't mine. It was a borrowed set from HR, one size too tight and clearly not made for someone who'd been trained for this. Still, it had my name tag clipped over the breast pocket, and that alone gave me just enough grounding. Walking through SeaTac that morning felt different. There was something quieter than usual in the air. Maybe it was just my perception, Or maybe it was the fact that everyone seemed to know what I didn't, that I'd been dragged through a storm nobody warned me about. I reached the committee room 10 minutes early. HR sat on one side, legal had a seat on the other. Across from them was the union representative and a senior captain I didn't recognize, probably brought in for neutrality. The table in front of me felt too wide, too polished, and far too impersonal for what I was about to unfold. Ms. Sorrell, the committee lead began, without even glancing up. We're here to clarify recent reassignments and to discuss concerns raised regarding your fitness to fly. I nodded once. I'm aware. One of the HR reps adjusted her glasses. Please understand, this is not disciplinary. We're simply addressing feedback that suggests potential instability under high-pressure scenarios. That word again. Instability. I didn't react to it this time. Instead, I pulled the folder from my bag, placed it on the table, and slid it forward. I'm aware of the phrasing used. I've seen the messages, heard the recordings. But more than that, I've lived under the weight of that narrative for most of my adult life. They exchanged looks. I continued. That's a collection of evidence. Preferential assignment records from last year. Recommendations that were supposedly written by me but matched my sister's phrasing exactly. And an anonymous HR complaint filed 3 months ago, detailing nepotism and manipulation within the ops team. I watched as one of the committee members flipped through the first few pages, her eyes narrowing slightly. My voice didn't tremble. I was past that point. This didn't start last week. It didn't begin with one rumor or one mistake. This is part of a larger pattern, one I've stayed silent about for too long, but silence, apparently, is interpreted as weakness in this place. I let that hang in the air. For years, I've been the one who adapted, who deferred, who never made noise. I'm not doing that anymore. The room was still. Not cold, not aggressive, just still. For the first time since this started, I felt like they were actually hearing me. The meeting adjourned without fanfare. No applause, no verdict, just nods, a promise to follow up, and a quiet ushering out of the room. But I didn't feel defeated walking out. I felt like I had finally shoved the door open, just wide enough for the truth to slip through. Later that afternoon, I was scheduled to attend a crew orientation meeting, mandatory for all flight staff returning from reassignment. I didn't expect Isolde to be there. But when I walked into the room, she was seated near the back, legs crossed, arms folded, wearing a look of calm control, like she'd just stepped out of a magazine cover on How to Command a Room Without Speaking. I didn't acknowledge her. I found a seat near the front and took out a pen, mostly to have something to hold. The session started normally. Procedures, updates, revised safety protocols. The facilitator, a man I'd met only briefly, was running through the slides with the kind of speed you use when you're trying to finish before lunch. And then, right in the middle of it, Isolde cleared her throat. Just a reminder, she said smoothly, not everyone who wears the uniform is emotionally qualified to fly. Some of us have had to intervene in the past to protect this crew, whether or not that was ever made official. She didn't look at me, but she didn't need to. The room froze. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like she was being noble, like she was the gatekeeper of professionalism. I stood, not in a dramatic way, just slowly, evenly. I turned toward the front of the room and addressed the group, not her. I passed my psychological evaluation, I said. I passed every technical exam, simulator run, and mid-air test under FAA regulation. What I failed at was believing that my own blood wouldn't try to sabotage me out of insecurity. A few heads turned sharply. If anyone here has concerns about my readiness to fly, I continued, you can file a formal complaint. I'll welcome it, but I will not stand here and allow whispered slander to shape the story of my career, not from strangers, and certainly not from someone who should have been proud of me instead of threatened by me. Silence. Then a voice somewhere in the back. She's right. Then another. Yeah. Enough of this passive-aggressive crap. The facilitator looked stunned. He adjusted his tie. Okay, let's stay professional, folks. Isolde stood up, clearly preparing to defend herself, but the mood had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. She knew it. And so did I. The session ended shortly after, and I packed up my things quietly. As I was walking toward the door, Captain Ellery, who had sat silently through the entire exchange, stepped into my path. He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. "You just gave them something to remember," he said. "Now give me something to trust." His voice still echoed in my mind as I stood in front of the plane the next morning, soft but deliberate. "Now give me something to trust." That wasn't just a challenge, it was a promise, and I intended to deliver. The chill from the early hours hadn't lifted yet, but I was already sweating beneath my uniform. Not from nerves, at least not entirely, but from the intensity of everything I had fought through to get here. I adjusted my cap, checked my flight roster once more, and made my way across the tarmac toward Gate 17. Everything felt sharper, the steps of ground crew, the fuel truck pulling away, the murmur of radio chatter in my ear. The moment I stepped onto the aircraft, something shifted in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't being questioned. I was being trusted, assigned, expected. The lead flight attendant offered a quick nod, barely glancing up from her checklist. No forced smiles, no pity in her eyes, just professionalism. It was the kindest gesture I'd received in days. I placed my flight bag behind the co-pilot seat and started my pre-check without needing to remind myself of a single step. Every system, every dial, every checklist line. My body knew what to do, even if my heart still limped a little behind. Halfway through, I tapped open the crew manifest on my tablet. Seat 4A. Elaine Marin. I froze. Mom. The screen blurred slightly before I realized I'd stopped blinking. I hadn't heard from her in days. Not since Isolde's mess started making its way through the system. I'd sent her 3 messages. Short ones, no guilt trips, just updates. She hadn't replied to a single one. I stared at her name. The plane wasn't even half full yet, but she was already boarded, tucked somewhere in the cabin, seatbelt fastened, probably thumbing through the emergency card like she'd never seen one before. My fingers hovered over the intercom, unsure what I would even say. Instead, I inhaled, turned off the screen, and kept working. I couldn't afford to crumble, not here, not now. By the time we were rolling onto the runway, I'd pushed her to the back of my mind, locking that emotional weight away like a carry-on in an overhead bin I didn't plan to open. Captain Ellery gave me a glance during takeoff, the kind that didn't need words. I nodded. We accelerated, climbed, cut through a sky that opened up just enough to feel like the world was giving me space again. At 13,000 feet, he slid the control column toward me. "Your bird," he said. I didn't hesitate. "My bird," I replied. I adjusted pitch, leveled, and guided us through a mild wind shift without flinching. The clouds outside shimmered like broken glass, but my hands were steady. When the turbulence came, I let it pass through the frame without overcorrecting, just rode the rhythm until it settled. And it did, because I could fly. Because she hadn't taken that from me. Touchdown was smooth, controlled. The moment the wheels kissed the runway, I felt something unspoken settle deep inside me. Closure, maybe, or just something like it. Once the cabin cleared and the last of the passengers filtered into the terminal, I stayed in the cockpit a moment longer, wiping down the controls, letting the hum of the engines winding down lull me into silence. That's when I heard soft footsteps. I turned slightly. There she was. My mother stood just outside the flight deck, her purse clutched in front of her like it was armor. Her eyes were glassy, but she wasn't crying. "You didn't just land a plane today," she said, her voice low, careful. "You landed yourself." I opened my mouth, but she raised a hand gently. I was wrong to doubt that, wrong to believe. Everything I heard. That's all she said, and it was enough. I nodded once, not because I forgave her entirely, not yet, but because I saw something in her face that told me she was trying, and trying mattered. I gathered my bag and stepped off the plane. In the hallway near the crew lounge, I was pulling out my badge when I saw Leora waiting near the lockers. She wasn't dressed for a flight. Civilian clothes, denim jacket, low bun. Her hands were in her pockets. "I figured you'd still be up here," she said. "Didn't expect to see you," I replied. She handed me a file. "Another one came in," she said. "From someone in scheduling, An audio file. I raised my eyebrows but didn't speak. She was bragging about it, Leora continued. Told someone over coffee that she had HR in her pocket. Said no one would touch her because she's a sorrel and no one's going to believe Felicity over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. They're starting to come forward, Leora added, quietly. But it's beginning. I tucked the file into my bag. Then I won't back down, I said. The words were quiet, but they landed. Leora studied me for a beat longer. You're not the same woman I trained, she said, almost thoughtfully. You're better. We didn't hug. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. Back in my car, I let the engine idle before checking my phone. A new notification blinked at the top of the screen. Internal Review Summary. Findings delivered tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. The moment I saw that calendar notification, everything inside me slowed down. Not in fear, but in a kind of focused anticipation. I didn't need a reminder for the meeting. That time was already carved into my bones. I spent the evening organizing my papers one last time. I laid everything out on the kitchen table, photocopies of internal memos, screenshots of text chains, the printout of that anonymous message, and Leora's recording now officially notarized and included as an exhibit in my submission to the ethics board. I wasn't jittery like before. I didn't rehearse what to say in front of the mirror. I didn't call Leora for reassurance. I didn't need to. My case wasn't built on emotions or personal vendettas. It was built on facts, dates, patterns. The truth, plain and simple. I slept for 5 solid hours, which might not sound like much, but it was more than I'd had in weeks. And when I woke up, the sky outside was pink and gray. Seattle's odd little way of saying, today might go either way. I brewed 1 cup of black coffee and drank it slowly while the house stayed quiet. Then I got dressed. Same uniform, clean pressed, not borrowed this time, mine. I pinned the wings over my left pocket and stared at myself for just long enough to see that I was standing straighter now. Shoulders back, chin up, no shaking hands. When I arrived at the building, there were already reporters outside. Not many. Just 2 small crews and a freelance photographer hanging around the sidewalk, pretending not to be waiting. But I knew what they were there for. Word spreads fast when someone in uniform accuses someone higher up of corruption. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked straight through the revolving doors, past reception, and up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. My legs needed to move. My heart needed the rhythm. The review room was colder than the others I'd been in. 4 people sat across the table, 2 from HR, 1 from the Aviation Ethics Board, and 1 external legal observer. Everyone had a folder. The stack in front of them was thicker than the one I'd submitted. Mrs. Sorrel, the lead reviewer said, nodding. Thank you for coming. We've reviewed your documentation and cross-referenced it with internal communications and personnel files. He didn't ask if I had anything more to say. He didn't ask for opening remarks. This wasn't a hearing. This was a decision. We've determined, he continued, that Ms. Isolde Marin has engaged in willful manipulation of reporting structures, undue influence over internal staffing assignments, and reputational sabotage through unofficial channels. I didn't blink. She knowingly interfered with flight team selection processes and submitted verbally and in writing false information regarding your psychological fitness to fly. No dramatics, no legalese, just the facts, 1 sentence at a time. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't smile. But my shoulders, God, they finally dropped an inch. Not in defeat, in relief. The lead HR representative took over. As of today, Ms. Marin is suspended from her position for 6 months, without pay. She will be required to complete a mandatory psychological and leadership conduct assessment. Additionally, she must submit a written acknowledgement of her actions to both the HR department and the flight union. A pause. If she attempts to contact you or breach the no-contact order, she will be permanently blacklisted from any flight or supervisory role within the region. That was it. The room stayed quiet for a beat, and then they dismissed me. I walked out the same way I walked in, straight-backed. Quiet, composed. The moment I stepped outside, the flashes started. Felicity, do you have a comment? Is this about retaliation? Did your sister know you were recording her? I didn't say a word. I kept walking, past the microphones, past the headlines I could already see forming. Pilot files formal ethics complaint against sister. Internal aviation shakeup. Family feud at 30,000 feet. Let them write what they wanted. I didn't need their words. I had mine. Back in my car, I closed the door and finally exhaled. The sound surprised me, longer and deeper than I expected. I rested my head against the steering wheel just for a second. I hadn't realized how heavy everything had been until someone else took part of the weight off. Later that night, I was folding laundry when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer anyway. Felicity? My mother. I sat down on the edge of my bed, holding the phone a little tighter than I meant to. I didn't raise you to fight like this, she said. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was tired. I paused for a second, then said quietly, No, Mom, you didn't. But I raised myself to survive it. There was a silence, a long one. Then she whispered, Maybe I should have seen more. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said. I'm asking you to stop pretending we're the same. Another silence. And then she ended the call without a goodbye. And somehow, I didn't feel guilty. I stood, turned off the light, and let the room stay dark for a moment. That's when my phone lit up again. One new message from the airline's media team. Subject: Feature nomination. Captain Ellery. Text: Captain Ellery has nominated you for a pilot spotlight piece on leadership under adversity. Would you be willing to share your story? I read the text twice, not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because something in me still couldn't believe it was real. A feature story, public. On record, they wanted me to speak, not as a cautionary tale, not buried in some internal policy update, but as a symbol of resilience, a pilot who had been grounded and got back up. I stared at the message, thumbs still, until the screen dimmed and went dark. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a walk. The sun was just starting to fade behind the hangars, casting that soft golden wash over the tarmac. I circled the perimeter once, my steps slow, my thoughts racing. I wasn't scared of talking. God knows I'd been forced to speak up in rooms where my voice barely counted. But going public? That was different. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what my story represented. About how many people, especially women, had been quietly shoved aside in this field, told they were too emotional, too green, too sensitive for the cockpit. And here I was, still standing, still flying. When I got back to the terminal, I responded with a simple word. Yes. The next morning, I sat in a small media room tucked behind the airline's HR office. It wasn't glamorous. Plain white walls, 2 softbox lights, a single camera set on a tripod. They had a makeup artist on standby, but I politely declined. I didn't want them to dress me up. I didn't want to look like a PR version of myself. I was there to tell the truth, not perform it. The interviewer, a woman in her mid-40s with steady eyes and a warm presence, smiled at me. Thank you for doing this, she said. I nodded. Thank you for asking. We settled into our seats, and after a quick mic check, the camera rolled. She didn't ease in with pleasantries. She went straight for it. What made you stay after everything? I let the silence hang for a second. I wasn't in a rush. Then I said, Because flying is mine. It always was. And no one, not even family, gets to take that from me. She leaned forward. Was there a moment you thought about quitting? I smiled faintly. Every minute for a while, when your uniform's cut to pieces, when your name's dragged through committee meetings, and the people you love most question your stability, it gets tempting to believe them. A pause. But I didn't stop flying because someone cut my wings. I built new ones, stronger, quieter, mine. She didn't say anything, just nodded, the kind of nod that means something landed. Later that week, Captain Ellery's retirement ceremony was announced. An email was sent across the company, formal invitation, dress code, reception to follow. I wasn't sure I'd be asked to speak, but the day before the event, an assistant from the office stopped by my crew locker. "He requested you," she said. "He wants you to say something. You were his last co-pilot." The evening of the ceremony, the hangar was transformed. Rows of folding chairs, banners with years of service printed across fabric, and a podium set up in front of a backdrop that read, "Thank you, Captain Ellery." There were pilots, technicians, trainees, regional execs, all gathered in quiet appreciation of a man who'd flown longer than some of them had been alive. I stood near the back, not planning to speak first. But when they called me up, the room hushed. I walked slowly to the mic, my heels clicking softly across the concrete floor. And there, in the third row, sat my mother. I hadn't invited her. I didn't even know she'd come. But she was there, hands clasped in her lap, watching. I turned to the mic and exhaled. "They said my file would be closed," I began. "That I wouldn't fly again. That one bad moment meant I wasn't fit to hold the controls." I paused. "But the sky isn't a door you can lock. It's a decision you make to rise, every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours." No applause yet, just stillness. And Captain Ellery. He reminded me that you don't have to be loud to lead. Sometimes the quietest moments are where character shows up. And for that, I'm grateful. Then the clapping started. Not wild, not loud, but steady, solid. Even my mother stood. Afterward, I stepped outside for air. The night had settled deep, stars faint behind the clouds, the air cool on my face. Ellery joined me, hands in his pockets, the same relaxed posture he carried in every cockpit. "You did good," he said. I nodded. "Thank you. For everything." He looked at me, eyes softer than I'd seen them before. "It wasn't your uniform that made you a pilot," he said. "It was how you landed when you had nothing on." That line stayed with me long after he walked away. I drove home in silence, no radio, just headlights and reflection. When I reached the front door, there was an envelope waiting, no return address, just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. I brought it inside, peeled it open slowly. A single note. "To Felicity. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I remember everything. Isolde." I didn't open the letter right away. I held it in my hands, letting my fingers trace the handwriting that somehow still felt familiar, even after all the distance we'd placed between us. There was no return address, no embellishments, just my name, just her words inside. I knew that before I ever unfolded the paper. The house was quiet. It always was on my days off. No ringing phones, no cockpit alerts, no static voices calling out cross-check complete. Just the sound of the wind shifting through the neighborhood trees and the creak of my porch chair as I sat down, envelope in hand. I finally tore it open with a steady hand and unfolded the note. "You earned what I tried to steal, and I'm sorry it took me this long to admit it." That was it. No long-winded apologies, no excuses, no begging, just acknowledgement. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. I didn't cry. But my chest did something. Tightened, maybe. Not in pain, but in a kind of release. Like something that had been locked up for too long had finally breathed. The autumn wind picked up, bringing with it the familiar scent of wet cedar and the coming rain. Seattle rarely gives you sun when you need it, but it always gives you time to think. I sat there a while longer before going inside, placing the letter, not in the trash, not in a drawer, but in the back of my journal. Tucked between pages filled with coffee stains, old log entries, and thoughts I'd never let myself say aloud. I turned to a fresh page and wrote one simple line. "I may never get the sister I deserved, but I became the woman she feared I'd become. And that's enough." I closed the book, placed it back on the shelf, and moved on with my day. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, zipping up my uniform. It was clean, crisp. The navy blue fabric lay smooth across my shoulders, the sleeves resting neatly at my wrists. But it wasn't the uniform that gave me pause. It was the badge, not the plastic ID clipped to my chest, but the small silver wings above it. a symbol. To others, it was just regulation, part of the uniform, like the shoes or the stripes on my sleeve. But to me, it was the one thing no one had been able to take, not even when they tried to rip it from me piece by piece. Those wings weren't handed to me out of pity or legacy. I had earned them. Through resistance, through grief, through every moment I stood alone when I should have been defended. I touched the badge lightly, just a brush of my fingers across the metal, and then turned to grab my travel case. The drive to the airport was uneventful. Overcast skies, light drizzle, a perfect Seattle cliché. But the kind that made you appreciate every clear landing you ever got. Inside the terminal, everything looked the same as always. Clean floors, voices bouncing off high ceilings, the scent of airport coffee too weak to wake anyone. I waved at the gate agents I knew, nodded to a few maintenance techs, and made my way toward the crew check-in. My next assignment was a Tokyo-Seattle international return, a long haul, complex coordination. But I was ready. At the gate, I reviewed the passenger manifest, the weight distribution charts, and the weather patterns for both departure and arrival, all routine, all standard. Then came the knock on the cockpit door. I turned, expecting the captain, but instead it was the new junior pilot assigned to ride second seat for this leg. He looked young, not by age necessarily, but by posture, nervous, eyes scanning everything like he wasn't sure he belonged in the space he'd been assigned. I recognized that look. I'd worn it once. He stepped in, cleared his throat, and gave a hesitant nod. "I'm Michael. First international assignment," he said. I smiled, gestured to the co-pilot seat. "I've been where you are," I told him. "Don't let anyone talk you out of the sky." He blinked, like he hadn't expected that kind of welcome, then sat, a little taller than before. As we prepared for takeoff, I went through the checklists with him, double-checking systems, correcting one minor input with a quiet correction instead of public humiliation. He was green, sure, but he was trying. And that was the thing no one ever tells you about being in the cockpit. It's not about having all the answers. It's about not folding when things get turbulent. It's about staying upright, staying alert, and staying grounded even when you're 35,000 feet above the world. I used to think that being a pilot was about precision and control. Now I know. It's about steadiness in chaos. It's about trusting yourself, even when no one else does. We took off without incident. The city fell away beneath us. The clouds closed in. And still, we flew. Sometimes, the sharpest cuts don't come from strangers, but from the people who were supposed to protect you. Felicity's story isn't just about betrayal, it's about choosing resilience when no one believes in you, and standing tall when even your family wants you grounded. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after being torn down by those closest to you? If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe, because we have more powerful real-life stories coming your way. Let's keep this conversation going in the comments.